Hi, I'm PH, and welcome to another episode of Good Bible Knowledge with PhD. In these videos, I want to answer common questions about the Bible in a fun and creative way, and I hope this will be helpful in your own spiritual journey in Jesus. Let's get started. What made King Saul want to kill David? After his famous battle with Goliath, David continued to grow in power and success. One day as David came back from the battle, the women sang a song. Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s. From that day on, Saul's jealousy began to burn within him. Saul tried many ways to kill David, including throwing a spear at him twice and sending him out to battle, hoping that he would be killed. But this only served to bring David greater success because the Lord was with David. Even Jonathan, Saul's own son, became best friends with David. After continued attempts to kill him, David asked Jonathan, "What have I done? Why does your father continue to seek my life?" Jonathan explained, "It is because my father knows that God has chosen you to be the rightful king of Israel, and the favor of God is upon your life." That evening, David and Jonathan made a covenant of unbreakable friendship, and David fled from the presence of Saul. Wherever David went, Saul pursued with murderous anger. David eventually found refuge in the caves of Adullam, where all those who were distressed and in debt and bitter in soul gathered around him. Sometime later, while in hiding, David heard word that the city of Keilah was being besieged by the Philistines. Against the advice of his own men, David sought the Lord and determined that God was calling him to rescue the city. Knowing full well that the city of Keilah would turn him over to King Saul, David obeyed the Lord, narrowly escaping the army of Saul. For several months, Saul continued to relentlessly pursue David. When David and his men were hiding in the wilderness of En-Gedi, Saul took 3,000 of his men to capture him. While Saul's army rested at a place called the Wild Goat Rocks, Saul went into a cave alone to relieve himself. It just so happened to be the very cave that David and his men were hiding. The men of David rejoiced, saying, "Behold, God has given your enemy into your hands." David, however, responded, "I cannot murder the king of Israel." Instead, he simply cut off a corner of Saul's robe. After Saul left, David stood at the entrance of the cave and called out, "My Lord and my King," and he bowed down before Saul. He then said, "Why do you believe that I seek you any harm? God gave you into my hands, and yet I chose mercy instead of vengeance. If you want proof, take a look at your robe." At this, Saul cried out, "David, you are more righteous than I, for you have repaid good to me, where I have repaid only evil to you." And Saul wept before David. Though this was not the end of Saul's pursuit of David, this incident reveals a remarkable attribute of David. Throughout his service of Saul, David remained innocent and pure in character, obedient to the Lord in every way. In this, the Spirit of the Lord continued with David wherever he went. Even when David received only suffering and hardship for his faithful obedience, David continued to show compassion and faith in the Lord. He was even willing to rescue those who in the end would not receive him. To this, all those who were suffering and hurting in this world were drawn to his side. This points ultimately to the great king who would come from David, Jesus, the Son of God. Jesus came to earth as God's chosen king. He was perfect in every way, filled with compassion and righteousness. Yet many people in his time rejected him and even sought to kill him. Jesus came from heaven to earth in order to call to himself all those who were weary and heavy laden, those who were looking for a hope and healing. Jesus ultimately gave his life for the forgiveness of sin and rose from the dead. And he continues to call everyone to come to him and find life and peace through faith in him. Thanks for joining for another episode of Good Bible Knowledge. We'll see you next time.